you will have double sounds.
Oh, okay.
All right, so let's wait for some time, maybe 2-3 minutes, and then we will start. People will start coming in a while. Hi everyone. Today we welcome you to yet another session of Saturdays with Sourish. And today we have a very special guest, a very close friend of mine who used to be my student as well. And she is Shalki Shrivastava. And I'm going to introduce to her, but let people pour in a little bit more. And then, when I see some more people coming in, then we will do the formal introduction. But those people who have already joined in, just say hi and hello to each other, what you are working on, what is your research area, which university you are from. Hi Vidya, nice to see you again. So Shalki Vidya is from Pune. He is into education technology. His research area is education technology. And he is a regular member of the club.
Okay. I see. That's really nice.
Yeah. So Vidya, you promised us that you would be bringing your students also. He's a professor over there. And because now there's no more Diwali, so just keep bringing your students in, and let them have a feel of, whether they would like it or not. Let's see how they would feel. Okay, hello everyone. Yeah, just say hi. Okay, great. Great to know you know that Vidya. Vidya would like to do his, pursue his career as a PhD, continue with his PhD in the Department of Computer Science at IIT. Right now, he's in Mumbai and he's a medtech.
Really cool.
So let's see whether we get some more people joining in. Usually what happens, Shalki, is that many people are not able to make it on time. But after some time, when we are done with the session, then a lot of people start. I can keep saying that a lot of people start coming in, and they watch the recording. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You've had quite a few guests till now, right?
Yeah. We are trying to sort of, bring more people in. But let's see. We just started this community, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely useful, and I'm sure I would have gained a lot had I gotten a chance to directly hear from quote unquote the horse's mouth when I was going through that phase of my
I don't
life.
know. I mean, like it's kind of like in many ways, COVID taught us a lot of things what we can do while we are at home. and all the different
Yeah.
ways in, we start coming up with new ideas, and that, what are all the different ways in which we can give something back to the community which we
Hmm.
belong to. And
Mhm.
it's all about life lessons, like all the mistakes that I try to do it this way, that all the mistakes that I made, and
Mhm.
in the same way I try to bring speakers who would also try, love to talk about the mistakes that they made, and based upon those mistakes, so that people who are listening to us and who will be listening to us, they don't make those same mistakes.
Right.
That's the idea.
Yeah. And like that's the thing. Like when I was making those decisions, I did not know a lot of people who
Right,
went through this path. Like barely I got a chance to talk to you and maybe some other professors. Even with seniors, like you just have a Facebook chat, but it's not necessarily enough.
right,
not not an in-depth view
right,
into what you're
right,
getting into.
right, right, right. Because it can't be done in a, like, these are issues, these are questions that have to be probed into a little
Hmm.
bit depth, and it cannot be done in a, like, single WhatsApp chat, a few WhatsApp chat exchanges, or even
And
email.
honestly, I mean, like just talking to a few people is probably not enough. Every person has a very radically different experience at times,
Right,
and they will give you very different perspectives.
right, right,
And you don't know what might prove important to you in retrospect.
right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
So we now officially announce the session to be live, and I would like to give you a little bit of, Ketul is trying to ping me and saying that, hey, I will never learn it, I guess. So I'm not in the gallery view, which means people are not able to see both me and Shalki. That's not a good idea. Okay. So yeah. So, uh, Shalki Shrivastava, she is currently, you're a research assistant, right, Shalki?
No,
At
I work
UNC,
as a research. No, I work
engineer.
as a yeah research engineer.
You're a research engineer at UNC, University of North Carolina, uh, in Carolina, in Raleigh, right?
Chapel Hill,
And
UNC Chapel Hill.
Chapel Hill, sorry, not Raleigh. Yeah. And I keep confusing NCSU with UNC. So, and then, and you have previously done some sort of research work at NCSU, right? And then you
Hmm.
moved over to UNC, and you are currently working with this particular lab, which I think which is primarily working on different problems in bioinformatics, if I'm correct.
Yeah, a lot of projects that we have going on are in bioinformatics, but that is we are not limited to that. We also have other projects going on in earth
Okay,
sciences and all.
okay. And Shalki used to be my student, my undergrad student.
Yeah.
Back when she was in DISCT, where I am a professor. And today I could catch hold of Shalki, and we will be discussing a lot of interesting things, which would primarily relate to all the right and of course the wrong decisions, or the wrong reasons for which one would be pursuing a PhD. What should be the right reasons to pursue a PhD? When do you really feel like, okay, this is the right time to actually, probably I should be even seriously thinking about a PhD? Or even when you are in the first year or second year of your PhD, to understand whether this is whether I'm really pursuing it with the right reasons, right? Because otherwise this journey is a long journey, and it can actually turn out to be quite a drag if you're not pursuing it with the right reasons. Then we will also touch upon the pros and cons of And because Shalki is a really good person to actually talk about that, because Shalki actually entered into a PhD program in NCSU while just after graduating out of her undergrad program. So we will touch upon that particular part. The pros and cons of what happens when you are entering a PhD program straight out of an undergrad program versus out of a master's program versus, let's say, that you have some work experience and in some research lab or some corporate lab or corporate environment, and then you walk into a PhD program. What are the differences and the challenges and pros and cons, and doing PhD in your own country versus abroad, doing trying to pursue PhD abroad. Like, a lot of people think that it's a great idea to pursue PhD abroad. Probably there is no real much hope to pursue one's PhD within one's own country. So we'll be touching on that particular topic as well. And then finally, we'll be concluding a little bit about there are multiple different categories and types of labs and research teams and supervisors. So you need to really understand well uh, what suits you, depending upon what kind of a personality, what kind of a researcher, what is your own style to work. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well, right? So over to Shalki. Shalki, just very briefly, if you can say a little bit about, especially when did that worm came into your being that I need to go into research. I need to be associated with researchers, let's say. When you were in your undergrad, just say, talk a little bit about that.
So, I mean, in undergrad, when I was in my fourth year, I was pretty bummed about. I mean, if I directly go into a job, I probably wouldn't get to learn so many new different subjects, which I had
Mhm.
the pleasure of doing in each semester. And I wanted to continue that kind of uh, it was fun, it was exciting, and I wanted to continue that kind of journey, so to speak, through my life. And I mean, of course, you learn a lot even if you go into industry straight after bachelor's.
Right.
Absolutely, there is a big learning curve, but it is more focused. I was more interested in depth along with sort of breadth, and also slightly more freedom in what I delve in. And this is why I was like, research, research seems to, and also, I mean, in research, you get not only get the chance, but you also, more importantly, develop the skills to, okay, pick up a problem, attack it, go through it. Like, the process of solving a problem is fun in itself. And whereas I, uh, from what I know, in corporate, it's slightly more structured.
Right.
So, so I felt that a PhD sounds like a good path to go to.
Right.
So yeah, so
And
after
And you remember these long conversations that we used to have as we used to go around the campus, together, and you
yeah.
used to ask me all these questions, and you were very, very clear about this one thing, that I really don't want to go into corporate, right? But at the same time, there were other friends of yours and juniors and seniors who went into corporate, and then later on they moved into research, right? So that
Hmm.
also happened.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
any kind of, like, because you are closer to the current generation than me. So any kind of, like, an advice or tips or whatever, your own comment, may not be an advice. Like, how do you get to know, like, which one am I? Like, like, am I the kind who can immediately get into research, or am I the kind who should first dabble into corporate a little bit and then figure out whether I am really cut out for something related to research, more in an
Oh,
academic setup.
so I think if you have any, so first of all, PhD is a long journey.
Right.
And if you have any apprehensions about potentially losing interest a little while down the line, then you should have a serious rethought. And maybe if you have a fear of missing out, that, this is something I would like to do, then you should just go for a corporate job, because it's not the end of the world. If you're really motivated, you you can come back to research. But if you get into research after that, going to, I mean, that is also a pathway which is possible. But as you said in the beginning, if you're not there for the right reasons, then it will be unnecessarily painful journey for you, which you don't want. So you want to get into PhD only when you're really excited about the core purpose of PhD, which is finding a new problem and wanting to solve it.
Right.
It's not
Right.
the degree, it's not the money. Uh, it's none of those. It has to be that core motivation.
Right.
And only then, even if you don't necessarily succeed, because there are a lot of factors at play, and even if you don't necessarily succeed in getting your PhD for multitude of other reasons, not necessarily related to your interest, even then you won't regret it so much, which is kind of important.
Right, right. So, so I don't know how much of a conversation you had when like you went to States and you was in NCSU for quite some time, and then there were your friends were all in India, back in India, and they were in Bangalore and Mumbai and Hyderabad, right? And then some of them were contemplating, right, like what to do, to do or not to do. That's kind of the topic today, right? So to do or not to do. Eh, did anybody reach out to you, or did you guys have any conversation among friends, like, hey Shalki, you are, since you are already there now, and I'm really thinking, and I'm not sure whether I would really like the corporate world anymore, or it's too structured, it's too project specific, I am not getting to do anything new, and what should I do? Were there any conversations like this that came up?
uh, Actually, not so much,
Okay.
because none of the people in my friend circle I mean, considered doing PhD seriously. I mean, some
Right.
of them were potentially interested in research, but they had some other reasons because of which they wanted to get a job. But yeah, there was no one who was seriously considering PhD, so I didn't have that kind of conversation with my friends. But like some juniors did reach out to me on Facebook, and that's the thing. Those conversations are very brief. It's hard to understand exactly what the other person is looking for, and you're not sure if you're providing
Hmm.
the exact what they need to them.
Right. Right.
So I did have some of those conversations, but they were not so much in
So
depth.
I personally feel that not loving something should not propel you towards doing something else. Sometimes it's a disaster. Like, since you are not liking corporate world, you feel like, let's do something else. So what else can I do? And let's go abroad and do PhD.
Mhm. No,
So yeah.
the problem is in corporate world, if you don't like your current job, you can switch. You can switch to a different profile. You can, if you don't like your boss, you can switch to a different team, or you can move to a different location. And it's much easier. The stakes are very low. There are no very strong consequences to leaving your current position. But in PhD, it's a very hard decision to make. It's almost like marriage. You sure you can leave
Right.
your marriage, but it's not easy to do so.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
think a lot, and then you also you don't take that decision easily. And in the time that you avoid taking that decision while thinking about it, that time is also not spent well if you're not happy, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
this is why I would rather advise that if you're not absolutely excited about research, go and experience the corporate world.
Right.
If you have a fear of missing out, go and experience the corporate world, and go there, do some good work. And if after a few years you still feel that, okay, this is not interesting, and research is what actually interests me, now that you have more clarity, talk to people, find the right fit, because again, just being interested in research is not enough. It has to be a
Right,
good fit. It's like absolutely important to have a good fit with your lab, the work,
right, right,
the kind of problem you're working on, the culture of the lab, everything.
right,
uh, and only then jump into it.
right, right. So, so I wanted to bring up this particular thing, when it comes to, what are the right reasons, or probably what are the wrong reasons to, you know, to do a PhD. And a lot of people think that, but before that, I just want to clarify something, as a continuation of what Shalki just said. A lot of people think that, you know, I love, I'm always interested in, knowing about new ideas, new problems, new solutions, new technologies, and I love reading about them, in science and in Nature, or in Scientific American or whatnot, and most likely I will love doing a PhD, and that's actually one of the problematic decisions, actually, according to me, because having interest in the research field, having interest in what researchers are doing, doesn't necessarily will make you, make you like research yourself when you actually do it. It could very well be possible that you might end up loving a career in science journalism just because you are so interested in knowing what researchers are doing all the time, right? So, Shalki, any comment on that? Because that's one thing that I have seen, that people, especially at a very early stage, when they are out of undergrad or just out of masters, and they feel like, because they're always interested in what researchers are doing, they feel like they are cut out for it.
So I mean, it's one thing to be like, oh, this is A is the problem and B is the solution of it. It's another thing to go through that journey from A to B. It is
Right.
it's like, just take some sports, right? I mean, you like when someone wins a tournament, or if your Indian cricket
Yeah.
team goes and wins the World Cup, but what precedes that? There's a lot of practice, there's a lot of analysis of your opponents, there's a lot of failure in between.
Right.
And they are there. I'm assuming a lot of them are there because n- they enjoy the
That process,
drudgerous
that
part
that
of it.
journey. Yeah.
That it's a drudgery, really, to some extent, right? And they, to some extent, either enjoy it or are very comfortable with it. And even if they don't get a success at the end of it, they are completely happy with it
Right.
because they enjoyed the process, which is very important. So as you said, I mean, it's not enough to be
Right.
interested in what is a solution to a particular problem. It's very important to be comfortable with uncertainty, to
Right.
be comfortable with discomfort
Right.
in general, of like being
Right.
there with a problem and
Right.
wrestling with it and not finding a solution, not knowing what to do, taking like 10 different steps, trying 10 different things, and then one works and that gives you a little flicker of hope, and then maybe you take a few steps in that direction, but then that fails, so you again try a few different things. That you should be okay with that. You should be comfortable with that, or at least you should be excited enough about a chance of success at the end that you are really peaked about the process itself.
Right. Right. So, another thing that comes up in my mind, when it comes to this thing, which I see that a lot of people think that I'm just giving you one example, that, if I'm very good at mathematics in my undergrad or in my masters, in my courseworks, okay, I suddenly feel that I can actually do PhD in mathematics. And that's not so true, actually. That's definitely not true. Being good in maths, or being good in, let's say, literature, or being good in anything for that matter, any subject, history, will not doesn't necessarily mean that
Right.
you would be a very good history researcher or historian, or you would be a very good literature researcher, right? So that is another thing that you have to be very careful about. That and by the way, people keep asking us questions, right? So I will be looking into the chat box, and if there are questions, then we will take them intermittently. So that's another thing that I think is very important to understand. To self-assessment, I think that's what Shalki you were saying. Like the self-assessment is going to be very important, and you need to know a little bit about that process, because sometimes what happens is we always look into the beginning and the end. We don't know the in between journey, what's
Mm-hmm.
the road, right? And sometimes what I see is that, not sometimes, most of the times actually, what I see is that both for undergrad as well as for master students who do not come from a very research intensive background, in their own campus from where they belong, in the university or the department from where they belong, if that is not very research intensive, then what happens is that these sort of things come up because they are not very aware of the journey itself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you have good domain knowledge, if you pick things up fast, uh, it's definitely going to be easier for you, right?
Right.
Uh, but I think research is a set of like two complementary skills. One is definitely the knowledge of your field and how quickly you pick up new things. But the other is, as we discussed earlier on, like being comfortable with the process, uh, being comfortable in that mode of being an investigator, as you put
Yeah.
it, right? That being comfortable with trying a lot of things, failing in a lot of them, and again trying with renewed vigor some more things, and so on.
Yeah.
Those two things are very both are both are important and they're complementary. And yeah, you can't have a successful research career without either.
So it's like, kind of like, if I can very quickly understand a question's answer, doesn't necessarily mean that if I am given only the question, I will be able to find the answer. And
Yes.
finding the answer itself is quite challenging. I'll tell you one story that goes back to my own undergrad. When I first got to understand the architecture of the RAM, RAM is a random access memory, which is essentially the memory of your computer or even of your mobile phone these days, your smartphone. And when I first got to understand the internals of what a RAM is and how a RAM works, and I felt like, well, this is so easy. I mean, why didn't it
Hmm.
come across anybody's mind before? But you see that if I had to, do this, if I have to come out with an idea of RAM, I couldn't have possibly done it, at that age. Although it was very easy to catch it up, once it is out there. So,
Yeah, like yeah, one good approach I realized in retrospect to have is that whenever you read something, study something, you should be actively thinking about why only this, why not something else? Like, why is this the solution of this problem? What are the other possibilities, and what are the problems in those possibilities? And only because that would actually help you understand why things are a certain way. And this kind of mindset is what helps you in research, because then you can uh, uh, on your own analyze all the different possibilities, the pros and cons, and decide which particular path to pursue, because there are a lot and you always have to be making those decisions. So actively thinking rather than just taking in information, critically analyzing it, critiquing it, maybe you'll come up with something better which doesn't exist so far, or maybe you'll just understand the journey what uh, those scientists went through.
right,
um
right, right. So that is one thing. The other, advice for those people who are thinking about joining a PhD program, the other advice that I would give is that go and talk to people who are already doing their PhD.
mhm,
And doesn't matter whether it is within your own country or abroad. Even if it is not, if somebody is not from abroad, doesn't matter, because the there are a lot of similarities in terms of the lifestyle of a PhD. And just go and talk to him. The other interesting thing I will give just to make it a little bit of fun. So there is something called PhD comics. Okay, I'm giving you the
Mm.
link over here. so if you, so essentially, if you really want to know what the life looks like in a fun way, in a easy way, you should just start reading PhD comics. PhD comics.
Actually, I can't remember. I had read this book on the PhD life of, it's like one of someone. There's an entire book on their PhD journey, and they talk about all the mistakes they made, all these
Yeah,
exactly the kinds of conversation we are having right now. I can't remember the name. Uh, Sorry, I'll send it to you maybe later, and you
yeah.
can
So and
send it to who's
we can send
interested.
it to Discord. Yeah, we can share it on.
Yes, yes. But that was a very good and interesting book to read, and I felt that yeah, it would have been nice if I'd known about it earlier on.
Right,
Uh, it was informative. It tells you about what potential problems you can face, and it. So that's the thing. Like, if you already know what sort of problems to expect, you're slightly better prepared to handle them, but also
right,
to recognize them in the first place. But if you're completely new and you have no idea what can happen, and then if something comes up, you're very slow to recognize that problem.
right,
And
right,
by the time you do recognize it, you've sort of wasted some valuable time,
right,
right? So
right,
this is why these conversations and like reading these kinds of books or comics, and like it's helpful. It's
right.
helpful.
It's extremely helpful, actually. And by the way, again, I urge you to put your questions if you have any questions. Now, coming to those people who have already in the PhD program, right? So they have already done that thing, made that leap.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and let's say that they are in their early stage of their PhD, first year, second year. I think that even then they should always, kind of do an introspection, and if there is any issue, they should be reorienting themselves so that the upcoming years are very smooth and easy, and they enjoy what they are doing, right? So that is extremely important. So let's talk a little bit about those things, because that our the points that we wanted to cover today would be a lot about that.
Mhm.
So the very first thing I think is that a lot of people think is about PhD when they are already in the program, uh, is basically they feel like, and this has something to do with the imposter syndrome, especially when you are coming from straight away from a a bachelor's program, like an undergrad. You completed your undergrad and you walked into a PhD program, or even from a master's program, which was not research oriented master's program, but it was just course based master program. So even then, when
Mhm.
you come inside and you didn't have that much of a an exposure to any kind of research, and when you come into a PhD program and you are like, well, what's going on? A lot of people know a lot of things and I don't know anything. And what we call as the imposter syndrome. So you
Yeah.
feel like an imposter.
Mhm.
So, Shalki, you went in there in one of the best schools in US, and you went in the computer science department, and you were an undergrad student from India. What was the situation? If you can just just recollect in the early days, and what advice would you give to those people who are still in their early days?
Uh, yeah. So, yeah, this feeling is definitely there that you don't know enough in everything you
Especially in
dabble.
the,
Like,
lab talks, where you have all the
right,
seniors,
you
talking about
don't.
this, and it's like all jargons going on top of your head, right?
Right. And you don't follow a lot of things. You hesitate in asking questions for the fear of asking silly questions. You're new to the place. You don't have a group of peers you can approach to have discussions. And apart from that, uh, you're not settled in the initial at least few months. You're extremely unsettled. There's a lot of responsibility. I mean, if you have TA ship, that's a lot of work.
Right.
And you don't have it figured out how to take care of yourself. You've never lived independently, so the first semester was very painful for me
Yeah.
because I was not getting food. Probably I was not able to like make sure I have food at the right times. I underestimated the value of getting food and good sleep.
Hmm.
I did not know people, so I did not know who to approach. I was also shy, so I would hesitate a lot in asking questions, which kind of was like a cycles. Like the more you delay in asking questions, the
Right. Right. Right.
more embarrassed you get in asking those questions. And I overestimated how much other people know. Also, I just thought like everyone is like super smart. They just know these things. No, they also picked it out, which
Right.
it took me time to really grasp that. But also, so like there were two very important takeaways for me from the first year of my PhD program. One is that it's very important to take good care of yourself, like your surrounding, your environment, like having your home set up properly,
Hmm.
getting good food, getting sleep, being comfortable, like just making sure you have what you need to function at your best. You cannot
Right.
this work is demanding. You need to have everything else in place
Right.
in your
Absolutely.
life
Hmm.
to be able to do something with this. Number one. And number two, just ask. Make a good network of peers, of friends. Actively go out and get a group of people you can hang out with, because like a lot of things, if you're not hanging out with people, you don't even get to know of these things. And I was like, okay, only I'm facing this problem, nobody else is. But they all figured it out among themselves, and I was not in that clique, so I didn't know. So
Hmm.
everything would suddenly become a huge so actually in later semesters I made sure, even like in the courses I took, I made sure like right on the first day, or even before the semester started, if I knew that I'm going to be taking a course which maybe has some group work or is has very demanding assignments, I would actually before that start finding who's taking this course. Do I know someone, like a friend of friend, who I can connect with and
Okay.
collaborate with them? So yeah, actively seek out a network of people you can collaborate with. You Peer learning is important. You don't learn from just your
Absolutely.
professors. Peer learning
Absolutely.
is extremely important. And the other thing is that you know, you don't have to necessarily stay in the lab or do the work you first started with. If after like some time you feel like the it this problem is not
Hmm.
necessarily of
Hmm.
interest to you, maybe you want to pivot, or maybe you would better fit in
Hmm.
some
Right.
other
Right.
labs culture or whatever, like you should leave.
Right.
Rather than thinking I will make it work,
It's
you
always
should leave.
messy to leave late.
Yes, the later you leave, the messier it is. So, I mean, if you see any, even like a hint of a red flag, act on it.
Right.
Don't
Right.
delay.
And we will talk a little bit more about what are the possible red flags, not just out of your own experience, but personal
Mm.
experience, but also what you have seen around and what I have seen around, and we will talk a little bit about that. But Vidya has this, kind of an experience. Probably this opinion is definitely coming out of his own experience, and he says that, and it kind of like touches upon what you were saying, like people form their own groups and cliques, and you are left out, being the newbie, sort of fresh over there. So what Vidya is saying is that most researchers rarely want to share their ideas with the unknown people. Like, let's say the person who has just entered, who is just coming in new, sort of, so to say. And it might, according to him, of course, it might sound negative, but that's kind of like the experience that Vidya might have either gotten himself or has seen in general while interacting with senior researchers. Uh,
So,
is there a way out? Yeah, Shalki, yes.
I mean, first of all, I mean, you apart from necessarily ideas just in research, there are also a lot of other things you need to pick up, right? I mean, you need to know, maybe you're very new. You're very new, right, to the domain. So maybe you don't know to what are the different tools to run this kind of simulation. It's faster if you're talking to someone who has already experience working with, and they can recommend you, like, hey, just use this, don't use
Right,
that, and why, right? Maybe have that sort of discussion. So it's not necessarily uh, sharing ideas, so to speak. It's just think about it like your coursework, right? I mean,
right,
there's nothing new there. It's just that you all learn faster and more by discussing those things, rather than going on the internet and doing a search for every little thing. That has to go hand in hand, but those conversations help a lot.
right,
And another thing, if you actually, if you feel that the culture in your lab is not where it's more where people are in their own cocoons, they're not
hmm,
ready to talk, uh, I think that's not the greatest lab to be working in. A lab flourishes even for the people who are refusing to share is when there's a lively uh, culture of sharing ideas and having conversations uh, with everyone. Uh, I mean, if you feel that you're not getting that kind of culture there, then maybe you should look for a better cultural fit for yourself.
I would also tell you something, that put it the other way around. Whenever you meet a senior, let's say even when you are already in the program, and when you are meeting a senior, you just keep asking them, maybe over a cup of coffee or chai or whatever, and just ask them, how did you uh, tackle the initial year, the first year of your PhD, and keep asking the same question to multiple different people, and
Mm-hmm.
try to, instead of directly saying, like, what's your research and what you're really working on, and a lot of times people don't talk about it because senior people, they feel like you don't really have that, they feel like you don't have the prerequisite to really understand what they are doing, and so they feel like it's not really something that would actually make much sense. So they, instead of that, if you start making friendship with this sort of conversation, which is more PhD life oriented conversation, like how to make sure that I am aligned with my advisor, how to make sure that how do you do the time management, because I am so new to this city or this environment or this campus, and I'm doing it everything all alone, and how to make sure that I tackle my coursework together with a little bit of research, that assignments that my would be advisor, because at the in the beginning you might not have a proper advisor, but somebody who might you might want to
Mm-hmm.
work with that somebody, right? And that's also something which Sati was telling, like, make that decision very early on if you think that there is something off, because you have because that's the entire point in almost every PhD program, that the advisor is not assigned right in the beginning, right? So you don't really have to you don't really have to decide on an advisor right in the very first semester or second semester, you know. So you
I
have,
know.
yeah,
No, so I was saying, like, I actually know people who worked, either did masters with thesis to get a feel for research and with the professor they potentially want to work with, or who
right,
even worked in two, three different labs, saw how it, like, whether they like the problem statement,
right,
the work culture, how they gel with the advisor, and then they made the call of whether they actually want to do PhD with that particular advisor or not. It's sort of like dating. Right?
right,
And I
right.
think it shouldn't be a taboo thing. You should actually uh, get a feel for it before making that long commitment. Otherwise, like, both of you will be unhappy. What's the point?
Right, right. That's what we were discussing when Vandana was in an earlier Saturday with Suresh, and we had the same conversation that it's actually helpful for both of them, actually. So don't
Mm.
don't feel bad about it or anything as such.
Right.
it's actually you should it's actually, again, it can become messy, and you should really not do that, because it's, at a later stage, because then things becomes very kind of
I
complicated.
mean, you have to do it if you have to do it,
Yeah,
but
that's true. Yeah.
the earlier you do, the better it is.
Right, right. And don't be like, okay, if you see that there isn't any alignment, and we are going to talk a little bit more about how to know even that there is an alignment or there isn't an alignment. So what are those signals, in terms of how do you get to know even? So now coming to the other point, which is, you know, getting into a program while you are, once you are done with your bachelor's undergrad, versus your, master's versus, and the idea is, a lot of people ask me this question, Shalki, that, you know is it the right time, especially undergrads, is it the right time to get into a PhD program? Should I be getting into a PhD program? Or they sometimes feel that it's a long-term commitment, it's a huge commitment, and I should not get into a PhD program. So I think in that way, you have already kind of answered that question, in the sense that do a research internship or some sort of a research project with a very good lab after you're done with your undergrad for 1 year or something. That can be another way, because then what happens is that you are exposing yourself to real serious research,
Hmm.
and you get a taste of it for 1 year, and maybe, hopefully you can publish one paper together with that lab, and that will also help you in strengthening your application to good places. And at the same time, you also get a clear idea whether this is, because you get a very, very clear idea about the community, the research community, how researchers are.
One thing, one thing I would like to point out though is that your experience is heavily influenced by the lab you work in, right? And if you happen to pick the wrong one, and if it kind of leaves a not so good taste about PhD for you, it is not necessarily a reflection on whether you would enjoy research in itself, but it is also,
Mhm.
I mean, it's a reflection on the
Mhm.
combined factors of the lab and research. Then you
Right,
need to figure out which one it was. So, I mean, because it might happen that you're very unhappy with your research life at one place, but you might really love it in some other place. So
right,
you have to be careful about what you take away from the experience you had, like introspection and the self knowledge is quite important.
right. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit about the, this, sometimes we have this thing that, a PhD in our own country may not be that much of a worth, but if we go abroad and do a PhD, that may worth more. So, can we touch a little bit upon? I was just wondering, can we touch a little bit about the pro? Because it has actually, it has its both. Both there are both the pros and the cons of it actually, and many people think it in a very skewed way, in a very, like, they either think that it's all pro or all con or something like that. So, what do you think about, like, when you were thinking about doing your PhD, or going into research, and you were definitely you chose United States over every other country. You could have possibly gone, done your work in one of the IITs, or you could have gotten into, let's say, Singaporean university, which is closer to India, right?
Hmm.
Or you could have gone to Europe or to Australia, but you chose US, right?
Hmm.
So, what kind of, pro is there, in terms of choosing a study abroad for research?
uh, so I mean, I think so there are a couple of things, right?
Mm.
I think the most important factor should be the advisor.
Yeah,
Most important factor is the advisor you're going to be working with, and the lab culture. Number one. Number two is the problem.
right.
and I want to emphasize it. I think the problem comes after that, also, because you
Yeah,
can be working on the problem you like, but if it's not at the right,
place
if it's
with the right
not
people.
at the right place with the right people, then you won't be able to. It will be extremely hard for you to make progress, and it will leave you with a not so good experience, which would
Right.
hinder you from pursuing that later on, right?
And by
So
right, I
advantages,
guess what you mean is compatible, right? Because there's
yes,
nothing
yes,
like
yes.
absolute right or wrong
Compatibility.
about
Yeah,
somebody.
of course. Compatibility, mutual compatibility. Like you have to be happy with them, they have to be happy with you, both ways. Um, and after that, I mean, I picked US because, of course, I mean, apart from the fact that there are good universities here, but there are also a lot of opportunities after I get done. And I mean, not to say that there aren't opportunities at other places, but just the sheer volume, uh, the number of places, the number of universities, the number of companies. Uh, I mean, thinking like, okay, a lot of things are in place here. I would let me see, let me go and work there. Um, do the question regarding
Right.
the question
Mm.
of doing PhD in your own country versus going abroad. I mean, one of the things I was excited about is just the going and experiencing a new place.
Right.
And also in retrospect, I think that is actually a very valuable experience. Um,
Right.
you learn a lot of things, like culturally, when you come to study to a new place versus if you come directly to work. I mean, more often than not, you absorb those cultural nuances more when you are in school here versus if you directly come to work. And I think a lot of them are for better. You learn a lot of good things, and you retain a lot of good things from your own background. And I think overall, you grow into a better person.
Right.
Not to say again, not to say that if you choose to take another path, you are necessarily losing out. But it all boils down to what you want, what you're looking for in life, and
Mm.
what you value in life, right? And
Right.
like personally, I always liked going to new places, trying new
I,
things, like the
when
understanding. Like,
mm, mm. In retrospect, if I look into, like, because I did the same decision, I took the same decision, and I also, you actually, Shalki, you were bred in an atmosphere at the ICT which is quite research intensive. You knew what is research, and you saw people doing research. But I was not in that kind of a situation. I was in a kind of a environment where there was no research, right? So
mhm,
I just went there, and then I started saying what is research. Okay. But
mhm,
I would, in retrospect, what I would feel is that the transformation that happened to me was less from the point of view, I wouldn't say that I become a better researcher, but more from the point of view of I am more open to all
mhm.
sorts of ideas.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. That has been huge for me. You meet so many different kinds of people who
Right,
question like the most basic things you take for granted. Like
right,
I would never have imagined like somebody can do this differently, like can do
right,
something else instead of this. Like
right,
you've just
right,
grown up like that. You've never seen it questioned. And suddenly these people come and they're like, yeah, what's the problem? Like these are the advantages of doing it this way. And like, huh, that actually makes sense.
right,
Right? So
right,
you, even if you don't adapt it, but I mean adopt it yourself, but just the biggest thing you learn is like there are a lot of
right,
quote unquote right things in this world, and what you believe is right is not the only right.
right,
And I think that in general helps you in life. And I'm not saying that again, like everyone's experience might be different. Someone else who must have gone abroad might be like, okay, it's totally not worth it. I would rather have been at
mm-hmm,
home, closer to my
mm-hmm,
family. It's a big function of what you want in life, what you're looking for, what you enjoy.
right, right. And I personally also feel that it's you also get to appreciate a lot that much of your problems are very global. are very global. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not that you are the only person who are having those issues. A lot of people are having those issues. So that is there. But there are certain advantages of doing your continuing your research studies with in your own country as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and one specific advantage is that you don't have to deal with a culture shock or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that definitely is anything that you think. I personally feel that because that takes away a lot of your time and energy and many things, right? And to cope up with a very different culture itself can
Mm-hmm.
sometimes take more time than what you would imagine.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially in the first semester, like most of your, I mean, you function at a lot less efficiency just because you're dealing with a lot of other things. So if you do choose to stay in the environment you're familiar with, you can focus all your energies on the actual work that
Right,
you're doing,
right,
which can definitely be
right,
helppful.
right. So Vidya has another question over here. So the question is that every researcher must think their own ways with online literature only. Okay, if it is pertaining to your initial days, your initial year of literature study and literature review and so on and so forth, I personally think that at that time point, one of the biggest problem over there is that you wouldn't be able to. It's not going to be an easy affair to understand even the papers that maybe your supervisor or your would be supervisor has given you, right? And you're going through all these papers and trying to maybe it's very new even, research paper reading. So at that time point, Shalki, do you think that engaging more with your seniors or with other fellow people, or what should be the best plan, or what should be the best strategy, when, or should it be like, okay, you are left alone and you all just have to do it alone?
So, I mean, are you asking in terms of specific tasks like
Yeah,
literature survey or in
literature
general?
survey, literature survey, in general literature survey. Let's say that the professor gave you 10 papers to read, okay, and
Mm-hmm.
so on. Yeah,
So I think like I definitely think I like you learn a lot from like your peers. So I definitely try to take up any opportunity possible to work collaboratively. So for instance, if we take the example of literature survey, uh, it's good to have a paper reading club with your peers, right? And
right.
you all read a paper together, one of you presents, you develop a couple of things, so when you're reading something just for yourself versus when you're reading something to explain it to someone else, there's an automatic shift in your mindset because you
Mm,
start thinking of what questions to anticipate, versus when you're reading it just for yourself, you're slightly more comfortable, you go into that zone of just taking information in without critiquing it. So
right,
there usually some gaps in your understanding. Apart from that, you also learn the skill of explaining it well to someone else. You learn the skills of presentation, which are all very important. I mean, research is not just about
mm,
doing your work, it is also about communicating it to
right,
someone else. If you do good work but nobody's able to understand it, nobody will publish it, right? So
right,
what's the
right,
point? It gets lost.
right,
So
right,
I mean, and also, like when you're reading something together, someone else might bring some other perspective to the table which you won't
right,
necessarily have thought of yourself. So I think you definitely learn a lot. So I think like engaging with your peers, having discussions, conversations is very not just good, it's actually important. It's
right,
extremely important,
right,
especially
right.
early
True.
on, especially early on for
Right,
your
right.
research
Absolutely.
life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. True. And you know what? Like while you are engaging with literature review at the early stage, there will be a lot of times when you would encounter a lot of concepts and maybe
Hmm.
constructs which are very new to you. You've
Hmm.
never read about them before. So you're and the same thing happened with your seniors. Okay, so don't worry about
Hmm.
that part. So what happens is that your seniors can give you nice pointers to where you can actually go and very easily understand. that
Mm-hmm.
concept or understand
Yeah.
that construct. So if the
Yeah.
more you talk about those things, the more the better it is at that stage to quickly grasp or quickly understand a paper. Also, you get to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to read a paper,
Oh
right?
yeah, that is a skill in itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Now coming to the final point, which is that we see that every lab or every research group has their own DNA, sort of, in the sense that some are very structured, some are extremely ad hoc, and some are somewhere in between these two end of the spectrum, right? So, and there's always this question about compatibility, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, some people thrive in a very structured environment, while some people do not thrive in a very structured environment. They rather thrive in an unstructured environment.
Right.
So, how do you, like, according to you, when you have gone through the NCSU experience, you're now going through the UNC experience. So if you can sum it up a little bit, yeah, about like what worked for you, and when you saw your other friends and colleagues and people, other researchers in other universities, uh, any stories that you might be able to share with us.
So I think uh, like whether you need a structured or unstructured environment is definitely dependent on your personality, but it is also dependent on which phase of your
Right,
career you are
right,
in, like,
right,
or your research life, right? I mean, for instance, if you're extremely new straight after undergrad, when you have no research experience, you would benefit a lot from a structured environment, because the things
right,
you would be discovering for yourself in
absolutely,
an unstructured environment, uh, you would learn those things more quickly from other people's experience in a more structured environment. It's like, what's the point of reinventing the wheel? If you know that a certain process works well, you
right,
can of course iterate over it and improve it to suit your needs, but there's no point in discovering that process which has already been discovered in the first place, right? So with
mm,
the newer you are, and also if you're new to the domain, somebody will be able to tell you that, hey, these are seminal papers of
mm,
this area to read first, and you learn a lot from them,
right,
rather than like going through like 100 different papers. I mean, every time I used to do literature survey, I would have like 60, 70 papers to browse.
yeah,
I mean, it takes us, I mean, a lot of them would not be good papers, but it takes
right,
time to go through all of them, right? That time is better served by like discussing it with someone is telling you like, hey, look into that. And it's not, structured is not equal to spoon feeding. There's a difference between
right.
spoon
Can
feeding
you
and
can you can you
structure.
give us two, three point signals of what is structure? How do you what are the characteristics of a structured lab?
So, like for instance, I think regular meetings with your advisor and the of your lab are important. I think making notes, like taking minutes of the meeting, having an agenda for the meeting, taking minutes of what was discussed, having follow-up tasks for each person, like or for you assigned, and then following up on that, rather than like not having an agenda, having a
Uh,
meeting that goes on for hours, and after at the end of it, nobody knows what they're supposed to do, and then again meeting, and then like the work doesn't proceed that way. Even in research, you need to have a task you do for a week, you meet, and then you discuss, and then you reevaluate what is the next step in this to uh, move forward. So, I think this is the most important element of what a structured lab
so
looks like.
there's a very clear cut emphasis on the roadmap and monitoring the roadmap
Yes, that
and the
process, that process.
milestones. Mm,
Yes, milestones. I think you can always go back and reevaluate them. You can reevaluate whether you should be even doing this task in the first place,
mm,
or whether
mm,
this deadline makes sense or not. But it's important to have those in the
mm,
first place,
mm,
so that you're not just wasting your time and everyone's time.
right,
Time is of a sense, right? So this
right,
this a lab that follows a process, whatever it is important. There needs to
all
be a
right,
process. A
right.
processless lab will not go far. or it will just take 10x time for something that can be done at
Yeah,
very little.
but sometimes you see, I've seen that there are also that sort of people, probably more experienced, I don't know, who do not like a structure. Maybe it's more to do with, I don't know, maybe it's more to do with the discipline, or the
I
kind.
think it's a function
Yeah,
of discipline. I like I work with very senior researchers who have like 20 years of experience, 30 years of experience, and they all follow this process because it's not about, I mean, i- it's like it's like you need to do work, right? You can all, and you need to discuss what are the results of, like, maybe you ran your simulation, or maybe you ran into some error while running those simulations or whatever. This is, when I say process, it's just about having a task and having a time when you like discuss where it went and what are the next steps. This is important. This is how all
right,
the companies function. This is how all the good research labs function. If you
right.
don't have that, then you are achieving far below your potential. This
Yeah.
process is important irrespective of your experience, your stage, or
Mhm.
everything.
Right, right. There has to be some process, and if you end up for whatever reason in a lab or in a group or in a research group where there isn't much process, then you need to set up a process for yourself, I guess. That would be like
No,
the.
but that's the thing. Even if you set up a process for yourself, if there are multiple players who you need to interact with, right?
Mm,
And if they are not playing ball, like, you can't do much from just your own end. And this is
right.
why I was saying that if you see that, then you should move. You
I
should
think that's
move to
a
a
that's a good
place.
signal to look at. Like,
Yes,
what, is there a process in this team or in this group or in this lab? Is there a process, or is it very loose? That can be a very good indication of in the
that's
early
extremely
stages of your
important.
PhD, in the very early years of your PhD, right? That
Hmm.
whether you would want to continue in that lab or not, right?
Yeah.
Mm, because I think if you are extremely experienced in what sense? In the sense that you have already done good amount of corporate research in very good corporate research labs, and you already have intermingled, done projects with people who have already done their PhD in those labs, and now you have come into and now you are trying to do a PhD. You're sorted out. You already come with a problem. Is in those kind of situations. I've seen that also. That you already know what problem you're going to come work on, and that is a very different scenario altogether. Because and usually what I see is not usually, but many times what I see is that it's a funded project. I mean, the PhD is funded, which means your company is funding it, and there is some sort of a collaboration between the advisor and the company, and they jointly do something. So essentially, sometimes the company makes sure that there is a process. But even if there
Hmm.
is no process, but I feel like maybe in only certain few very theoretical kind of, but still over there you need some process.
Still, you need some process, right? I mean, honestly, I mean, maybe there are people who work like that and work prolifically, but I don't know a single such researcher
Right.
who does a lot of great work without any
And,
process.
and also
You
what,
need
yeah,
process is just about like having a touch base. Like, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's bi-weekly, maybe it's monthly, whatever it is, whatever the frequency works for you. You set some task for yourself and you go through it and then you reevaluate, right?
right,
That,
right.
and think about the next step. That is important,
So,
irrespective of your
hmm.
experience. Yeah.
So that's kind of like a great sort of, so to say, to wrap it up. Like, so I think that would kind of like sum up today's kind of discussion as
Mhm.
to what to do and what not to do. And the most important point that Shalki probably in the entire course of today's discussion has told you is what she's mentioned at the end, which is process. So be extremely careful that you are in a lab or in a team, or you are choosing, if you are not yet in a PhD program, then you're choosing a particular lab or team which has some sort of a process. And the way to do that, way to know even beforehand, is to talk with the people in that lab,
Mhm.
or to talk with other
Mhm.
people who are who are get some more information, talk with other people who knows that lab, maybe other labs who knows that lab in the same
It's a
department.
it's important to ask how they work rather than whether they like
Yeah,
it or not, because a lot of times people are not comfortable in necessarily sharing their honest opinion because they're
right,
tied with the place they're working with.
right. That's
But
true. Yeah,
if you ask them about, okay, how do you work, like do you have meetings, or how do your meetings look like, what does your day look like,
right.
uh, how do you make progress through like different problems you're working through, those kinds of questions give you more
Yeah, what
insight into the
happens? What
working
happens
style.
when you are stuck? You know,
Right, right. Yeah.
so these sort of things, right?
Hmm.
So okay,
Hmm.
thanks a lot, Shalki, for giving us the time. I don't know what's the time over there at North Carolina?
It's like 11:38 a.m.
AM. Okay,
Yeah.
but we
Yes.
are actually in 10:08 p.m. and there are
Okay.
people from India who will now want to retire for the weekend. So we
All
are going
right.
to wrap it up, and
Mhm.
thanks a lot for agreeing to be part of this.
Thanks for
And
having
what
me.
we are going to do is that, we hope that we would be able to convince you to for some other exciting topics that are
Okay.
lined up, and you can do some guest appearances later on as well. Yeah. So thanks a lot, everyone,
Yeah.
and be very safe, and take very good care of yourselves and your family. uh, Thanks a lot, Shalki. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Bye.